3, 2, 1, let's go. Welcome back, guys. I know it's been a little while since I uploaded, but I want to talk to you today about bounces in Mario Kart 64. Now, what are these bounces that we saw in some of those Royal Raceway videos, and how do those work anyway? Bounces have been used before. They've been used in some of the old non-shortcut videos on Royal Raceway, the end of Mario Raceway. It's definitely been used. We see them used in some shortcuts like Calamari Desert, jumping over the tracks. But how do they work? And where else could we use them? Are there any new shortcuts out there, perhaps? As with any video game, Mario Kart 64 has frames that you interact with. And this game runs at 60 physics frames per second. As you approach the ground in a fall, it may be that you have a frame that happens to come very close to the ground and thus you come to rest on the ground. But it could also be that you're moving fast enough, or you had a certain starting height that made it happen. You end up pretty far below the ground on one of these frames. And if you're at least 1.7 units into the ground, there's a mechanic built in the game that ejects you from the ground. And it's also true that if you happen to press R to jump on that frame where you're in the ground, you get ejected even further. And that's true on flat ground. It's also true on angled ground. So you can drive into a slope, get far enough under the ground that you can get a bounce in that way as well. You can also fall at an angle. So there's a lot of different options of how to get these bounces. I hope you enjoyed the quick throwback to some of our DK antics from the last video. As you can see, we got a bunch of different bounces using DK in that video as well, and some of those should make more sense now. Let's take a look at Royal Raceway, that non-shortcut lap, and talk about the bounces that I got in that. Starting off the race, we come around the corner, and instead of taking the bowl like you normally would, I veer off into it and drive down towards the corner. And what I'm doing is I'm aiming for the slope change here so that I can get enough inside the ground that I can get ejected out. And upon doing that and hitting R, I jump up and nearly clear the grass, and I'm able to come up around the next corner. I do get a quick snag off of it to make it a little bit sharper. And then I get a bounce up this grassy section here. That's important so that I can then delay my use of the mushroom so that I can use it up higher on the hill. So I'm not slowed down by the grass at first. And then I use that first mushroom to go all the way to the edge of this little rift here. This rift, it's important that I enter it without having jumped, so that when I hit this wall down here, hit the ground, I'm able to jump when I hit it. That's something I haven't mentioned yet, is that if you have already jumped before you hit a surface, you can't jump again when you enter it. So you can't get that big bounce out of it. So having gotten a big bounce out of that, I come up around the corner here. I head up the ramp. And I do this quick little slide jump off the edge of the ramp. And then I come up towards the end here where there's a rather large corner cutter that I'm able to do by bouncing over this hill. There's a very specific, to get the big jump over the corner, a very specific polygon I need to hit. It's this one right here, right in front of me. It's only touches the ground in one part, and I have to hit it with a high enough speed that I can get a bounce and with a good enough angle so I can jump up and over this hill. Now I can just drop off and slide to the finish. Just for fun, let's take a quick look over at Frapp Snowland at another application for bounces. This one's not terribly useful because it's marginally faster, if at all, and also it's possible to do a prior jump without a mushroom. So we wouldn't be going this path in an optimal situation, but might as well show you this. You drive towards this hill. It's just steep enough at a high speed to be able to get inside of it low enough to get a large bounce, go over it, and then take a more direct path towards this canyon. And now we're back to Royal Raceway. Back when Forrest and I were experimenting with driving through walls and trying to figure out what the constraints were for that, I tested jumping through this wall and realized that I was able to get a really large bounce, and in fact, it was possible to cross the entire moat here. So let's take a look at that and then talk about why it happens and why it's not something that can be done without jumping through the wall. Watching this back, as you can see, I actually jump before I go through the wall. So it's strange then that I'm able to jump again when I get a large bounce to cross the river. But if you watch closely, after having jumped, I do encounter the floor again before going through the wall. And that means that I get to press R again when I land on the ground. Unfortunately though, it's impossible to actually drive through this section of wall in this area. So this was requiring cheats to jump through the wall. And thus it's not possible to jump and get a big bounce that I can hit R on in this section. For a little while, Forrest and I were both trying to figure out ways that we could get a big bounce across the river here. And we came to this section and we're trying to jump across the road and get a big bounce and figure out how we could get that to work. And at the time we didn't realize that, not completely, that you couldn't press R again if you had already pressed it to make the jump. So we found a few different ways that might work, but that nothing was getting all the way over. But revisiting this, I did realize that you can reset the jump state without having to hit the ground again, as long as you hit a wall, if you hit a wall that's actually there. So here's an example of using that to get closer to jumping across this moat in a legitimate way. Note here that I do jump, but then I do encounter the wall to reset that state, so I can jump again here. As you can see, this, at least with this attempt, it didn't make it, and it doesn't really look feasible either. But we did learn something here. Maybe we can apply it somewhere else. So one night a few months back, Forrest, Beck, and I were hanging out, and we were talking about bounces and how we didn't really understand them completely. And I was definitely agreeing. We didn't understand them completely, but I felt like we understood them better than Forrest thought we did. And it turned out, I think, one of the key things that I'd realized that he hadn't was when you hit a surface and you get a bounce, your X, Y, Z velocity, so the full vector velocity, changes direction. If you're only looking at your speed as the game reports it, then your speed does very odd things. And it doesn't really make sense where the vertical speed comes from when you get a bounce. But when you look at the X, Y, Z, it pretty much takes the speed you had and just the vector changes direction. And so as we discussed this, I felt like I could pretty much apply a bounce to any surface as long as it met the criteria that would allow a bounce. And Forrest commented, well, if you could do that, as long as you could get on top of the wall on Royal Raceway, that's an FF the whole way, and we could use that to get onto the ramp. And I hadn't considered this, and it was an interesting challenge. So for the next, I don't know, hour long, I was screen sharing, and Beck and Forrest were watching as we were talking, and I was trying to bounce up on different parts of this wall. Eventually, I found a spot that looked really promising, and I was able to get really large bounces as long as I didn't hit R, and oh man, it was so painfully close by the end of the night. I mean, I'm talking close enough that it seemed it must be possible, but it was late enough that we needed to call it. So I shared the BK2 file, the input file, and said goodnight. The next morning, Forrest had an opportunity to work on it a little bit, and he said he just barely adjusted the input and was able to get on the wall. And we confirmed we had a new shortcut. So let's watch that together. So first we use a mushroom, and then immediately jump into an AB spin turn. And one more mushroom here make sure we go off that steepest part of the slope there. Don't jump. Jump here and use one more mushroom to get up on top of the wall. So this particular shortcut requires 3 mushrooms. That's a lot, and it would complicate the 3-lap for sure. So immediately we got to thinking, how could we reduce the number of mushrooms here? Even if you can get it down to 2 though, you still have the issue of only being able to do this once per race. Recall though that I found that you can hit a wall to reset that R state, the state that lets you jump again. And I realized of course that we're jumping over a wall. So what would happen if I ran into that wall hard on purpose to reset that R state? Could that help me get up on top of the wall? It turns out that it does. Applying this wall reset technique, I was able to get up with 0 shrooms. Here's the new fast lap task to show you. Let's watch that back and I'll comment on what's going on. I mushroom and slide on this grass here because it's a slope, and the slope, if you're facing downward on a slope, you actually go faster while sliding. And then when I approach this wall, I jump when I hit the surface that's slanted enough to give me a bounce. I have just enough speed to get a pretty good bounce out of it. And then I want to hit really high on that wall so that my R state resets. But then I still have time to fall down, bounce back, and regain some of my forward momentum so that when I intersect with that grass, which is a steep slope, and I have enough speed downward to go at least 1.7 units into the ground, but I also then have enough XYZ velocity to convert into upward momentum to get on top of the wall. One other quick note is at the end I do spin out when I'm placed down. That's on purpose because I found out there were situations where if you got placed at a severe angle when Lakitu dropped you, you wouldn't trigger the lap. But if you spin out, you do trigger the lap. And for a while, my fastest completions actually involved spinning out to complete the lap. This one doesn't actually require it, but I kept it in just to demonstrate that. Forrest also completed a 3-lap task. It's really good, so I'm going to include that as well. Be sure to check out his channel to see this in full 8K. You'll notice he uses a lot of the same strategies we've talked about. One thing to be aware of is that he has to take the first lap a little differently than the old shortcut 3-lap strat. He cannot take the ramp warp on the first lap. He can't jump left on the ramp because he needs to have the last section jump equal to the ramp so that the jump on top of the wall places him there. Check out this next corner too. Forrest found out that you can hop around the corner to save a very small amount of time. You've probably also noticed that we didn't go for the shortcut on lap 1, and that's because if you go and do that jump onto the wall on lap 1, you won't get placed on the ramp. You have to first get your last section jump set to near the ramp to be able to get placed on it. So it's not feasible or it's not faster to do it on lap 1. We have to do it on laps 2 and 3. Note also on the second lap, he still has to go straight here because he has to keep that last section jump value for this lap coming up. Another thing you need to be careful of that I didn't mention is you can break the checkpoint, the last section jump value, by going too far into the grass here on the left. If you go very far at all into the grass on the left, in this wider section right before the jump, you'll end up overriding the last section jump with the value that's not favorable. Not really that important for the 3-lap, but for the fast lap, it's something that's very easy to mistakenly break. The fast lap task goes about as far over as you can go, so if you want a reference, you can look at that video. Well, a new shortcut in Royal Raceway. Pretty cool. I wonder what else we could do with those bounces. Maybe there's something. This one's from pretty far back in the archives. When Forrest and I were still trying to figure out where we could apply drive-through wall techniques, one of the things that we had seen in Chaco Mountain, where you could kind of fall down through a connection between a steep floor and a wall, we thought maybe that could be done at the beginning of Calamari Desert to go around the finish line and do a lap skip, sort of like the GP task did, but straight through the wall. It turned out we couldn't get the speed necessary to do that. It's just not possible in the game. But while trying to do it, I actually found out that you could jump over this entire wall. Or at least I found out you could get pretty close, and finally I was able to do it after a lot of trying. So here's a video of that happening in GP mode. Now clearly that execution didn't save time. I went out of bounds before triggering the lap. I still had the star going when that happened. It wasn't going to trigger a lap, but all I have to do is bump my position over a few units towards the finish line, turn off the star, poke my angle slightly, and it works. So although it's very difficult, and we haven't actually done it in GP mode, it seems almost certain that it's possible. I've tried a little bit on and off to do this in time trials as well. The speed is possible in time trials. There's really, as far as we can tell, no reason that this shouldn't be possible in time trials. It's just a matter of lining everything up. But it's extremely difficult even with tools to do it. Only time, perseverance, and many attempts will end up telling us whether or not this is possible in time trials. But let's close out here and I'll share the closest attempts I've had so far. If you made it this far in the video, congratulations, and sorry it was such a long one. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you at the next video.